And June thought that was funny because she said he wasn't supposed to have that. He was breaking security.
I'll bet.
There was the same day that they had the conversation with the pilot about the bodies and the wreckage. Later on that day, a courier from the commanding general came around, and I heard this same description later on. He had what was called a too-hot memo. This meant that you had to stop what you're doing, read the memo, and sign it. And it said that some irresponsible person was talking about dummies and flying discs, and that you will cease and desist all references immediately or be subject to a fine, dismissal, or possible imprisonment.
Whoa.
So she had all of these details. Now, did she have, was she the smoking gun witness for Roswell and all of that? No. But you know yourself as an attorney that having a solid corroborating witness, that's like having the cornerstone of your building put down. That solidly establishes the rest of the story. And that's what June did. Her testimony was very powerful because she was credible. We could prove where she was. I had the papers to prove that she worked there. And I had her on tape, and we talked about it at great length. And I didn't know that. I had no idea what I was going to do with this information at the time. She just wanted me to have it. And
yes.
Eventually, her cancer did come back. And the last conversation I ever had with her, I said, "What do you want me to do?" And she said, "Tell my story." So that's where I got the title of the book. It's Tell My Story, June Crane, the Air Force, and UFOs.
Oh,
and that story has opened so many doors for me that it changed my life.
Well, I'll bet, because you're talking to a woman firsthand who had firsthand knowledge of corroborating the entire story of Roswell and other UFO crashes at the same during the same era down there. That would have. What were your feelings about listening to her tell this stuff to you?
I was stunned. I mean, I don't know, but it was so matter of fact with her. She was a very direct. She was a what you see is what you get person. I mean, she'd had a lot of personal difficulties along the way. She'd outlived 2 husbands. She was a straight shooter. She would just tell you the way it was, and of course that. As an investigator, that's my favorite kind of witness. Somebody who doesn't sugarcoat it.
Exactly.
Just tell me what's going on. I just want to know. I just want to know the truth.
Well, from what you've told me, James, that June Crane would have been the perfect witness to have on the stand. It would be very difficult to challenge her veracity, I believe, in any kind of defense counsel cross-examination. Sounds like she would have held up really well.
I think she would have. Also, the other thing with her, unlike a lot of, I hate to say it, many UFO witnesses that I've interviewed, if she didn't know, she didn't know, and if she didn't remember, she would tell you that. I get very worried when I'm interviewing people who know everything.
Yeah, that is a little suspicious when they get to that point, when they're answering every single question with a quick answer, and you don't know if it's the truth or not.
I'll be honest. It's when they start telling me that they know all about UFOs because the Galactic Federation gave them the whole thing last night.
Right.
Okay, I mean, could it be true? Yes, it could be true. But I don't know how I'm going to prove that.
Yes. Well, let me ask Joanne, since I'm sure she's still on the line here.
I am. I love the story of June. That's one of my favorite things, you bet.
Yes, and I was going to ask you, you've lived with this story and James telling it to you so many, many years. Did you ever get a chance to talk with June or hear her story?
Oh yes. Oh, yeah, I was present during some of those interviews. Jim and I got back together kind of in the middle of this.
Yes.
And I'd known June before Jim did.
That's true.
Because I was a librarian and she was the president of the Friends. We had, Timberland's a big library district. And June was quite a force. I did tell Jim, and sometimes he includes this, of all the people I met in my library life, June Crane, she was June Caba then, was the least likely person I would have said would have seen aliens. Like Jim said, she was very matter of fact. She was a hardcore businesswoman. She really got things done, and she was not a fanciful person at all. That's another reason she was so credible. Even when she spoke, she just talked about the facts. But when she told her story of her work at Wright-Patterson, she would tear up. It was really, really so important to her, and it was kind of a sad fact of women's lives back then. She married a guy who was in the military police there, and he then got out of the Army, wanted to do something else, and they moved to North Carolina, and she didn't want to leave her job. She did really well with it. She was getting promotions, and she had a son, and she pretty much had to choose to follow her husband, which she did, so she left, and that was a great regret. She said, back then it didn't even feel like a choice. That's just what women did. But that was sad. And she certainly thought of her time at Wright-Patterson as the most important and interesting time of her whole life.
Oh, I'll bet. Now, with your intuitive abilities and hearing June tell her story, what were your feelings about her veracity and what she said?
Oh, I thought she was absolutely credible. Like Jim said, the way she told her story, how she told the same story over and over and didn't change the details. Another interesting fact, she told us a lot of other kind of peripheral things. That she had her fortune read by Edgar Cayce when she was a little girl. Her mother, she had a very difficult upbringing. Her mother was a single mother for a long time. She had a number of, quote, daddies, unquote. But she had one that was especially kind to her and kind of a mentor, and he took her to see Edgar Cayce. And supposedly Edgar Cayce gave her a very positive reading, including that she would have a big part in changing history. And when they got home and showed it to her mother threw it in the stove and burned it up.
Oh, what a story that is. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Edgar Cayce, if people listening for the first time don't know, was probably the most famous psychic called the Sleeping Prophet. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And he was in Dayton, Ohio at the time when she was a little girl. We verified all the June stuff independently, too. And then she did tell us that, and Jim told the anecdote about when she took dictation from the scientist that she thought was Werner von Braun. And it was certainly one of the paperclip scientists, and she had to stay up all night and take this dictation and then transcribe it before she could go home, and it was all about the space program. And when she finished, her supervisor told her, June, this is going to help start the U.S. space program, and because of this night, you will have made your place in history. And every time she told that story, she'd just burst into tears, because between that and the information she heard about the crashes and the aliens and the cover-up, she really knew that she was a part of history, and that's what she wanted to tell. And she gave Jim, not only did she ask him to tell her story, she went to a lawyer and drew up papers giving Jim the exclusive right to her story, and she didn't really have very many papers. She had papers that proved where she worked and stuff. What else did she have, honey?
Just basically all of her personnel records.
Yeah.
And she gave me some of her photographs and her early school records and things like that. We tried really hard to find. She had two pictures that included some of the scientists that she worked with. Oh, yeah.
Master Sergeant Clarence. She went to his wedding, and she had this wedding picture. She couldn't remember his last name. And you wouldn't believe how many Clarences there were in,
there's more than you would think.
Early 50s. We tried really hard, and so had she, to try to figure out what his last name was and who he was, because he was one of the ones. Was he the one with the piece of the metal?
He was the one. Yeah, no, he was the one who flew in there.
Okay.
Who said that he had brought in bodies and wreckage.
Yeah.
And he wasn't the pilot, but he was part of the flight crew.
That's right.
He was a master sergeant.
That's right. And so we tried really hard to find him and never could, but she did have that picture, and she'd kept this stuff, for 50 years through multiple moves, a couple of marriages. Her first husband was killed right outside their home in Portland. It was their 10th anniversary, and he was going to take her out to dinner.
Oh, that's a sad story.
And he had gone out to put the new tabs on the license plates with their son, and a drunk driver came around a curve, and his last act was to push their son out of the way, and he was hit by the driver, and he was killed. And we verified that.
I actually found the newspaper clipping where the whole thing is described.
So she worked very hard then as a single mom to support her son for many years. And so June had quite a life, but she was always such a determined person.
She was also an expert gardener, and she was really, she had taught herself carpentry. She made money by I guess flipping houses in Portland, Oregon. She would fix them up, buy them, fix them up, and sell them.
Herself, in other words.
And then her son, between that and ROTC, her son graduated from Stanford, and then the son married rich, and her family didn't like June because June was, one of us. She was common and straightforward and not from a wealthy background.
Oh my
goodness. So they were estranged.
Yeah.
But of course, if she had been close to her son, maybe I would have never gotten the story. So who knows?
Yes. And I was just going to mention that is that through all the ins and outs and the ups and downs in June Crane's life, she seems to have been in the right place at the right time for these historic events to happen, and probably was quite a key figure in making sure they did happen.
Yes.
Well, I can tell you that when you work for any high-powered organization, from 20 years in the police department, I can tell you that the two secretaries were probably the two key people in the whole department, the chief secretary and the investigation secretary. Those are the only two people that really know anything. And I can also tell you as a detective that when you go into a business, the secretary is the one you want to get to know. Whether the boss likes you or not is not anywhere near as important as whether or not the secretary likes you.
Well, and I'll bet
they're the gatekeepers.
Why that one officer was kind of cozying up to June Crane there, showing her.
Well, she was young. This is a male-dominated environment with very few women in it. And I have a picture of June from back then in 1947, and she was tall and young and attractive. And so I can kind of picture that. I mean, it's not unprecedented for men to talk too much around an attractive woman.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I remember.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one other, just two brief comments. Another thing June told us was that a lot of the guys, when they came back, especially from New Mexico, reported seeing strange things in the sky constantly, but they quit reporting them because if they reported them, they would be put in solitary confinement until they pretty much recanted.
They called it debriefing.
Debriefing, and it was solitary confinement. Oh, man.
Well, if you have to keep repeating the same story over and over again, and they won't let you leave, and they won't let you take a break, pretty soon you're going to think twice before you report much of anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing I wanted to say about June, she was president of the Friends of the Library and president of the library board out there for many years. And one reason was because she absolutely believed that the truth belonged to everyone. And, of course, that's what public libraries are about. Everyone can find information. And, of course, that was